Welcome to a brand new episode of Starts at the Top, our podcast about leading differently. I'm Paul Thomas.
And I'm Zoe Amma. Our podcast exists to help leaders and their teams understand what they need to do differently today to prepare for the world of tomorrow. We started Starts at the Top as a podcast about digital disruption, but we soon realised that leaders were telling us about something more important and urgent, about how traditional ways of leading had changed forever.
We make it our mission to speak to leaders who are carving out new ways of leading, covering topics from emerging tech to inclusion, from remote work to mental health and resilience, and from climate change to AI. If it's about the status of leadership in 2025, soon to be 2026, it will be on our podcast.
We're not here for the shiny corporate case studies. We share stories from leaders who have learned lessons and made progress the hard way. And our podcast is here to share ideas and inspire others.
And in this episode, we're sharing our interview with Tony Zona, Chief Data Officer at Grant Thornton UK, who tells us about his development pathway from tax trainee to becoming the leading accountancy firm's first Chief Data Officer in 2022. Tony's story begins with a pretty original take on how teams in large corporate organisations often find themselves talking at cross purposes when it comes to change initiatives, and we're looking forward to hearing from him later. But before we get to Tony, we promised a more considered appraisal of the AI skills for the UK Workforce Report, which came out a couple of weeks ago, and is a spotlight on the urgent need to equip people and organisations across the 10 key growth sectors the government announced earlier this year, with the knowledge and confidence to embrace AI. It's a fantastic resource. Let's say that first and foremost. I think it introduces practical and adaptable tools for businesses, such as there's an AI skills framework, as we mentioned last time, an adoption pathway model, and an employer checklist to help employers and educators map the skills that are needed for their employees. The report identifies structural barriers to adoption across the government's 10 key growth sectors, such as fragmented training approaches, limited digital literacy. Again, I sort of see that even in the accountancy firms that I work with, and patchy access to resources, especially for small and medium-sized businesses or SMEs, and marginalised groups, importantly. It also presents a plan for inclusive training and responsible AI adoption with an overall ambition to build a fairer, more agile and future-ready skills system for the whole of the UK. And I suppose it's in this equality which is my principal concern. First and foremost, in my trustee work, our tiny little charity works with marginalised groups where I know data literacy is already a concern. We make provision for non-digital access to application forms because of digital exclusion amongst our clients. So I wonder how the rising use of AI might affect these groups. And on the other end of the scale, my work life tends to be focused on SMEs, whether that's mid-sized accountancy firms that I tend to find myself working with, or the clients that they themselves serve. I think one of the challenges for these firms is the relative lack of investment they are able to make in AI development and skills compared to the biggest firms, the top 4, or top 10 probably, if we're honest about it. So in both situations, I think there's a danger of a widening gap between the haves and the have-nots. It's a little bit worrying, although I'm glad that these resources have been developed for everyone to use to help us level the playing field a bit. So Zoe, you and I have absorbed the report a little bit since we last spoke. What do you think the impact is for leaders, staff and volunteers in the charity sector?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things to consider here. The first thing is about understanding how some of this guidance on skills within the framework is going to play out in the context of the charity sector. So I think the framework really caters to the fact that we have so many different sectors and such a wide level of AI skills and adoption and digital literacy in the UK to some extent. I think looking at this and working out how you can make it really relevant for your organisation and the ways of working is going to be really key. So, for example, I'm looking at the entry level at the moment on the framework and some of the things it suggests around technical AI skills. It's saying writing prompts for AI tools. And really, I think you'd need to guide staff there on, well, what are you using the prompts for? What are the use cases? None of these skills are going to be exercised in isolation, right? That's the thing. That's one of the areas that I have seen organizations finding most challenging when they adopt AI, that you need to really think about the technology in a way that isn't commoditized, it is holistic, and you're really thinking about all those different parts of the workflow the skills represented by the people who are involved, and also all the risk and opportunity that's threaded throughout. So I think that's one of the things. How can you really make this relevant to your average employee? I also think that, like any framework, it's probably going to be best used and best valued by organizations that do know a bit of what they're doing in this area
Mm.
already. And as you say, there'll be lots of organizations who don't know where to begin, even with a framework like this. So that for me is the big question. What support will be offered around the framework? What communities can leaders join to talk to others about implementing this framework? Because this is a good resource. I am
Mm.
pleased that it's out there. I will be pointing people towards it. As ever, the challenge and the opportunity is going to be how people implement this.
Yeah. And I think it's difficult, isn't it? Because certainly within the sector that I most often represent, it seems like there's a different approach or a different framework released each week. Here's another accountancy body saying what they think about AI, and a lot of it's the same. But if you're a leader within an organization trying to navigate something that you probably don't have time for, a lot of the reason that people won't implement frameworks around AI is because of a lack of time, particularly within the accountancy sector. Most people are on a timesheet. They're not free to sort of strategize and think about how these things are going to affect them long term and into the
Mm,
future. And if you delve down to the smaller organizations, the small firms, will it even be on their radars yet? And I'm sure it is because it's in the press. As you said, their own reaction to it won't be something that they've thought about, won't necessarily be something that they've budgeted for as well. But I do think the impact of this more widely means that their clients will start to come to them with more expectation around how AI is going to be used in the work that
mm.
they are doing for organizations. And that's why I think the impact on the wider SME market is quite significant. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it's all going to be in the implementation and how, well, people like you and me, I guess, are supported in how we take this framework and are able to adapt it to the world and the clients that we work with.
Yeah, the consistent implementation thing is going to be really important, especially around the technical skills, isn't it? I mean, to some extent, you could argue that the responsible and ethical AI skills and the non technical skills, some of us will have seen shades of all of this before, won't we? In other areas of risk management, stuff we've done around data, some of the soft skills, change management stuff, responding to innovation that has come with previous waves of digital disruption. Although, of course, none of us have really seen anything like this on this scale before. But the technical stuff, I'd say, as a driver of growth in the UK economy, you'd want to make sure there's some decent consistency on that, because we do have this big systemic digital skills gap in the UK, and we don't want that to become a systemic AI skills gap.
There's probably also the dual speed nature of all of that, isn't there? Because the tools are developing at a rate that none of us could have predicted. I don't think even the tech organizations that are building them can predict quite how fast they're moving. So getting the framework in place so that you can at least attempt to keep pace with that change, I think is going to be massively important to organizations.
Exactly. So in summary, some of us know what we're doing, um, but some of us don't. We're all figuring this out together.
Yeah. Well, it just made me laugh when you said, and we're used to doing this in sort of other areas of digital transformation, and we all had such great success with all of that. So what can possibly go wrong?
But there is something for learning from previous failures, right? Which is a very
Yeah.
disheartening way to describe my career. But there is stuff to learn from, right? So an example of that is I have been talking to various clients about how we need to learn lessons from the way product and service design came into organizations 10
Hmm.
years ago, where you'd have a little innovation team springing up, but then it ended up in a silo and it all
Yeah.
became a very nice and quite expensive hobby. If the same thing happens with AI, it just ends up in a silo of its own. And then once again, you've got a lot of cost and not a lot of growth and strategic value coming from that. So yeah, I think that's definitely a lesson to learn from these previous cycles of failure.
Yeah, well, I think it's important because one of the pieces of work I'm looking at doing is a piece around governance and the opportunity within sort of tech governance within organisations for people within communications roles to really take a lead, because it's stuff that nobody wants to do. So if you can find the opportunity to step up and lead those discussions and start with the boring questions around, well, what's our policy on this? What controls do we need to put in place? And lead those conversations, then you're doing yourself a favor as a communications person that sort of historically has spent their lives trying to get on the inside, but feeling more and more permanently pushed to the outside. So I think it's all going to be really, really important to explain to people. And I think that speed of change, building in flexibility and adaptiveness, these are traits that I don't necessarily always see in accountancy firms. So I think we're going to have our work cut out, but good that the framework is there and we can lean on it.
Absolutely. Well, we're all going to have to work differently. We're already seeing how ways of working are shifting and evolving, and there's going to be a lot more of that to come. We'll all need to adapt.
We will indeed. In fact, we'll all need a lot more of Tony Zonas in our lives. So, without further ado, we'll hand over to our interview with Tony Zona from Grant Thornton UK. Many of the clients Zoe and I talk to day to day are exploring the ways that AI will help them to transform their organizations. But many of the efficiencies and insights associated with AI are predicted on the availability and curation of good quality data. The old adage, rubbish in, rubbish out, has never been more relevant. So today's guest is working right at the heart of data-led transformation in a top-tier accountancy firm. Tony Zona, Chief Data Officer at Grant Thornton UK. With over 25 years at a firm that employs over 5,000 people, Tony's career journey is a story of adaptability and innovation. Starting as a tax trainee in 1999, he has transitioned through roles in tax, project management, and process management, and became the firm's first chief data officer in 2022. Tony leads the organization's data strategy, driving initiatives that embed data literacy, governance, and analytics across the business. He's passionate about using data to unlock value and improve decision making and create a culture where insights fuel growth. Now, full disclosure, I worked with Tony throughout that journey, leaving my role at Grant Thornton as he was starting to gain real traction in the firm through a mixture of open experimentation and developing clear proof points and use cases that highlighted the importance of data and what it was telling the firm. We used to have some fantastic conversations about digital transformation and data and how we wanted to transform the firm. And Tony is now there leading that work. So I'm really pleased to welcome Tony to Starts at the Top. Welcome, Tony.
Thanks for having me.
So some of those conversations, usually around a kitchen table in our St Albans office, we talked about data in a fairly unique way. So can you tell us a bit more about how you've compared Grant Thornton's business unit to Italian dialects being spoken past each other in your family home?
So, I use the analogy. So, Italy's got 20 regions, each with their own towns and villages, and they all have their own dialects. And in an organisation like ours at Grant Thornton, business units and teams, they all have their own language, their own dialects. So, first step for us was to acknowledge the differences rather than bulldoze them, creating a central glossary to establish a foundation, almost like a translation guide. We even called it our language as well, so it sounded less technical. And then we used that as the foundation, agreeing definitions for consistency, for clarity of understanding, the evolution from dialects into a business language, pretty much.
And how have you taken that and then turned that into a sort of data as a language from metaphor into an operational reality across I think you said 350 teams, is that right, in Grant Thornton?
It might be. Should know, shouldn't I? I've got a dashboard that will tell me. Several teams, definitely. So taking that, our language, like making that available to people, making it searchable, allowing people also to update it as well. So, Paul, you'll remember we love an acronym
Oh, yeah.
in Grant Thornton. So having those acronyms stored centrally, defining those, making those easily available so people understand what we're talking about in the organization. So that helps bring it to life. And once you've brought it to life, then it makes it a lot easier to build that into solutions, dashboards, analytics.
Give us some examples of how you've managed to surface that. I think one example that I remember from very early on was you talking about how you'd used Power BI dashboards to interrogate some of the internal data that I don't think had been surfaced before. So you were able to put some stuff in front of the partner team that really highlighted their behaviors in terms of data recording and data entry and how that varied across teams.
I described it as an evolution from a reporting culture to an analytics culture. So um, whether that's financial information that used to be shared via reports, via Excel, we've obviously got an organization full of very numerically literate analytical people who love to share an Excel file, but making that surfacing that in a dashboard to tell the story of this is actually what's happening. This is where behaviors could be changed, how we could address and change those results based on having that data as easily available as possible.
What are the metrics that are telling you now today that that's starting
Um,
to work?
Adoption metrics, so who's using what, data quality scores, and I think most importantly, fewer of what does this mean emails and messages and requests, and also aligned to that is to can I just. So historically, it's a request. Can I have a report that says
Mm.
X? And they provided a report. Can I just have it filtered a different way? Or can I just have it looking at something else? When you can produce the surface the data that's just consistent with the appropriate filters on top, you're avoiding the can I just questions because it's self-service. People can address the can I just themselves.
And in terms of getting people speaking that common language about data, I mean, you've done this tremendous act of translation, right? Because we've all worked in organizations, haven't we, where data is something that feels like very, very sort of aspirational. With a lot of the organizations we work with, we're always trying to impress the principles of good data governance and good management. But then people sometimes see actually putting all of that into practice as a real overhead, don't they?
Yeah.
So how have you managed to get leaders on board with understanding that actually this is an investment, it's not just an overhead on their time?
I might be about to say something that surprises you, but don't talk about data. Everyone wants to talk about AI, and that's understandable. And sometimes I think it's AI because they can see the potential value and the business outcome. So if we can highlight the value and work backwards, I describe using AI as like the Trojan horse and get people talking about data or addressing data governance in that way. Focus on the value and the outcomes definitely helps, and then working backwards from there.
I love that. AI is a Trojan horse. That's such a brilliant way to do it.
I'm not the first person to say that. I can't
Okay.
take the credit for it. I did see it somewhere, but it works.
And so, what typically would an outcome? Grant Thornton has a CEO, COO. They come along and they say, Tony, I'm looking for a report into productivity across teams, productivity across offices. Is that something that they can self-serve themselves now, or is that something that your team would help them to put together?
We've got several views across productivity, fees, opportunities, time analysis. Obviously, you'll know Paul, time's a key data point in organizations. Um, there's lots of talk about predictive and prescriptive analytics. So going beyond the hindsight piece, moving into the foresight. But without that hindsight, without that key foundational data, we can't do the predictive and prescriptive piece. You need everyone to have those behaviors, to trust the data that's telling us what's happened, so we can use the evolving tools available to predict what will happen and how we can make it happen.
Yeah, and that's something we see quite often, isn't it? There's a sort of a stretch ahead to, and I've said to Zoe several times, you sort of look at the way AI is being sold. It's going to it's going to make operational efficiencies. It's going to be able to cut down the time spent on this process. But often within an accountancy firm, it's not always clear what those processes and services are that you're trying to improve. And if you really do have 350 teams, you're going to have 350 different versions of how that process is run in teams as well. So earlier this year, let's talk about this. Earlier this year, Grant Thornton committed about £1 million into a new 3D data-driven digital mindset initiative, and I've seen you talking about this quite often on your LinkedIn posts. So what separates this program within Grant Thornton from the typical training offered to accountants, and how will you measure the impact of this on the firm's culture over time?
So yeah, our 3D program, it's about a mindset shift and a cultural change. So we looked at several data literacy providers, and their focus was very much on things like calculating mean median mode from a set of data, which for an organization of accountants and tax advisors wouldn't doesn't really fit the bill. Um, rather than being a focus on the mindset required for organizations to unlock value from data, digital, and AI. So it's quite a unique approach with 3D, focusing on our leaders and our associates. And that's designed to create a pull push effect for leaders to adopt and drive new data-driven digital ways of working through building their knowledge, confidence, and capabilities, and allowing them to role model the mindset required and set the tone. For associates, it's the push alongside their accountancy qualifications, understanding the power of those tools to solve issues, improve ways of working, and having that dual cohort from both sides of the business can drive that transformation more widely and rapidly across the organization. And that's not to say that's excluding anyone else, because there's also some wider content and material being made available to the wider firm as well. Measuring it, there's several data points that we're looking at, as you'd expect from a data-driven digital program, from tracking ideas being generated by cohorts, the solutions developed, and engagement with our digital tools, to name a few. So it's very much focused on outcomes and business value, as opposed to, we will improve our literacy, we will be better at understanding data. We're trying to focus on the business outcomes that we want.
Does that mean that data literacy then becomes a key part of everyone's development pathway at Grant Thornton from day one? So I'm a trainee and I come in and start the job. That is a real focus of my time over that first formative couple of years.
I will hesitate to say yes, only because I have to question how comfortable our newest associates may or may not already be in being data driven, their data maturity, their AI maturity. We will have people coming into the business now that this may well already be their world. So
Yeah.
I would say yes for many of our organisation, but I would just reflect on, well, our next batch of associates, will they already have a lot of that foundational mindset and culture that we need, and we need to leverage to get that business value that we want. Long-winded way of saying yes, it may evolve to be something slightly more different as time passes.
I guess so. This goes back to the age-old question that we've probably faced in looking at digital transformation more widely, isn't it? That how does that sort of permeate all the way down to a written job spec that goes out, for example, with all these new skills needed in the workplace? How much do we hire for that in the first place? And then what kind of a gap are we trying to fill?
Yeah, very much so. I always think transformation is something that happens on the um, vertical as well as the horizontal, and you need to sort of think about at what point do I start really mandating the depth of, for example, who we recruit for, what skills we recruit for, to sort of set this tone about this is where we need to be focusing on making the North Star in everything, essentially. So it's really great to hear about your example there, Tony. And have you faced any barriers in putting that into practice?
there's always the time barrier in an organization like ours. So the dual approach came about by accident, organically. So I was working with Data Literacy Academy on a pilot for our leaders, and Joe Ritchie in the organization, who leads learning innovation, she got in contact with Data Literacy Academy about something around data literacy for our associates. And then we put the two ideas together, but then it does always come back to a time commitment for people. So I was working on the business case to demonstrate that value, that time commitment from our people would produce the outcomes that we wanted.
I think it's like many things within that professional services environment. You can say, yeah, I'll happily be data literate, Tony, but tell me what the time code is for my timesheet so that I can make sure that the time is covered.
Yeah. And I think the key is that we don't talk about it as data literacy. I know we are, and that might sound strange because we are working with Data Literacy Academy. It's 3D because it's that data-driven digital mindset. What does the data help us unlock? And people will be bored of hearing me say it. Data drives digital, people drive data. This is very much focused on that people culture element. It's rare that you'll hear anyone talking about it as a data literacy program in the organization.
Just thinking about the progress so far, is there a crowning achievement that you'd like to share with us? Is there something that you knew that you were getting somewhere when this happened?
I would say two. I'd say one was the launch day where we had the leaders and associates in the same room, and that collaboration of ideas between them, and some of the ideas produced was brilliant to see. And that was day one, but also seeing some of the ideas and suggestions and recommendations coming through from this data-led, AI-led mindset, and thinking this is just the beginning. These are the sorts of ideas and value we're unlocking now. What will that look like in 12, 18 months' time and beyond?
Is that hard or easy to sift through? Because within the amount of ideas, there must be a crazy amount of quite obvious, easy to implement stuff, and then quite tricky. This could be a 2 or 3 year development to even get to the point where
Yes,
this is possible.
but we have a really good process of reviewing those across the appropriate stakeholders and SMEs in the business. And there's a full formal review prioritization process, which helps, and also helps group ideas together if similar ideas are raised and shared. And these, when I say ideas, these range from I have a particular problem, or I could make this small task a lot better, through to there's this transformational change that I think we could really achieve if we did X, Y, and Z.
Can I ask about AI hype? So we were talking about everyone wanting to talk about AI earlier,
Yep.
and absolutely that's something which we are seeing every day in our work. How do you get leaders to focus on the really necessary things that need to be done? So as you said, everyone is really excited about AI, but some of the less exciting topics, as we were saying, about things like data quality and governance and literacy. How do you maintain that energy and excitement about the really cool new stuff whilst also keeping them focused on that balance of we need to get these foundations in to make the most of it?
It's highlighting what's in it for them. So I mentioned not talking about data,
Mm.
but if you can surface to them, if you can understand with leaders what their priorities are, and if they have a particular pain point as leaders, say to understand their forecasting and their future profitability, if we can surface data from the systems that they're using, and identify, look, we've got this analysis here that's predicting your future forecast, but there's X number of opportunities that you've recorded and X million of fees that aren't included in that calculation because there's missing data points in each of these fields. And we can give them a link back to those data points that they can update. That information becomes part of that forecasting and prediction. It then becomes self-perpetuating. They can see why they need to enter the information, because they can see the value from it, because it does their prediction, and they can see what they need to do and what they need to drive. It means more people trust the data because they know the quality is improved, and then they'll go in and use it, that wheel going in a continuous motion.
It creates a feedback loop, doesn't it? Because
Yeah,
you're able to go back to people and say, look, the quality of the data you're recording as a team isn't quite up to snuff. And if it was, here's the amount of value that we would then be able to show you. And I think that's probably the golden goose and the golden egg. If you can get that, then you can unlock so much more through teams being open and available. But presumably, what that means is on top of that, you've got all the wonderful behavior and you've got all the
yeah,
wonderful data sets. But presumably, what that also means is you uncover where things aren't quite so good or rosy as well.
yep,
And that must have an impact. And I know that one step that Grant Thornton has taken is the have an absolute source of truth on things like CRM data, for example. There has to be a certain level of recording. Otherwise, to all intents and purposes, that work doesn't exist and that work can't be remunerated. Is that right?
absolutely. Back to the hundreds of teams we have. We still need that consistency of approach. We need that trust in the data, and the only way we can get that is to have that consistent process, that foundational data that then they have different processes, different services they need to deliver. That's fine, but foundationally, what's recorded and how, what's an opportunity, what's a relationship. We're back to the definitions, making sure we've got those business definitions agreed, so we've got that clarity. We're comparing apples and apples.
It's so interesting hearing the way you talk about data, Tony. I'm really enjoying it because the words that you have used so often in this conversation, people and relationship and culture, it really strikes me that our relationship to data in organizations is quite an emotive one, isn't it?
It might be for me because I, I'm a non-technical chief data officer. So, um, yeah, I tried to bring it back to the behavioral piece and the why. I said it to my team last week. Um, Not everyone wants to talk about data necessarily. Not everyone can see it as exciting as we may all think it is. So you have to find a way to bringing it to life. And that's why I talk about the people or the value, the outcomes.
Nice. I'd love to hear more leaders talk about data in this way.
Thank you.
Well, maybe they've got a program at Grant Thornton that leaders could apply to attend and go on and learn the 3D approach. So yeah, just thinking about and I was obviously we shared part of this journey earlier on, but thinking about how you've been within the firm for 25 years and that journey through the firm that you've had. I think when I first met you, you were in the tax team. Certainly, I remember having conversations with you probably about some of the internal knowledge sharing on the internet or something like that. It's a great advert for the firm's internal mobility. So, how do you think your personal path has shaped the opportunities that you're now able to create for the future leaders within the firm?
I always look for curiosity, communication skills, ability to build bridges across teams, not being a technical chief data officer. Often look for those skills in addition to any raw technical ability as well. It's back to the language analogy for me. Always keen to identify where people have the ability to translate between the business and the technical side of things. And for me, as having been a translator pretty much my whole life, I think that really helps. So where we've got to this rapidly evolving world of AI, we'll get more and more help from AI on the technical requirements and technical skills. I think it's the people skills and the emotional intelligence are going to be even more in demand.
I certainly recognise that. I've still suffered today from the opportunities that I think I had from within Grant Thornton. And I say suffer in a sort of a jokey way, but it can be quite tough to pin me down. And I think some part of that is some of the opportunities that opened up, started in communication, moved into marketing, got into digital transformation, did all sorts of things like that because of the entrepreneurial spirit that the firm grows within its people. I take it that continues today, and that's something you can be really proud of within the firm.
Yeah, I mean, I always describe it as the role I've got now didn't exist when I first started.
You couldn't have been it, literally.
So yeah, I always telling people to find what they enjoy and lean into it, which is easier said than done when not you may not be quite sure what you enjoy when you first start. Maybe in a prime example of
On this podcast, we try to cover learning across private, public, and third sectors. And we have quite a bit of a focus on the third sector. So a lot of our listeners will be listening to this and thinking, okay, there's got to be some practical takeaways that I can bring into my organizations. They often lack the budgets of the bigger global consultancies. What practical steps do you think more resource constrained, and I'm not saying, £1 million investment is a fairly big investment to be able to make. I'm not sure most of the charities listening will be able to do that. But if you're a more resource constrained leader, what can you take into your work tomorrow to spark your own data literate culture within your organization?
Start small, pick one process, one team, demonstrate the value and outcomes that could be achieved from an improved approach to data. I definitely suggest focus on what the business values. So if there's a business strategy, focus on one of the questions in that. I was at a conference a couple of years ago where there was a data leader from the RNLI, and she spoke about their business priority of saving lives rather than profitability, and how they focus their data solutions on answering the question of how the data can help them save more lives. So definitely focus on that, what the business values, and use the tools available initially. So whether that's Excel, SharePoint, Power BI, Copilot, ChatGPT, as long as that data is being managed securely, obviously in your own enterprise environment, and absolutely celebrate the wins. This is something I think we need to do more as well, because that culture shifts when people see the results. To shout about it, and sometimes when it comes to some data initiatives and data wins, we don't always shout about them as much as we should do. Excluding 3D, obviously, that we shout about a lot, and rightly so.
And looking ahead, are there any trends that you see in data coming to the fore that you're especially excited about, Tony?
There's lots around AI, lots of people talking about whether it's Gen AI or agentic solutions, but I'd always steer people back to the value and the foundational work that's needed to unlock value, which is where the data piece comes in. Back to Paul's original point about garbage in, garbage out. It's highlighting where the data will impact on AI.
That's a great reminder to everyone listening. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'd reflect on the same thing. Racing to get ahead, but actually needing to put the fundamentals in place can sometimes feel like you're pulling people back to the starting point, but it's so necessary.
I think sometimes we can forget that there are no AI experts out there. It's too new and evolving rapidly. It's here to stay. The horse has bolted. It's no it puts in AI back in the box now. So it's understanding how businesses can leverage what's there and what's to come. It's just evolving at such a rapid pace that I'm not sure there are many people who can actually articulate it in a way that makes it completely clear for businesses, which is why it comes back to identifying some of these initial use cases and addressing the initial pain points and then building from there.
Yeah, creating a culture of exploration, not answers, I guess, which is, I imagine, quite tough within an accountancy firm where everything does have an eventual answer.
Just a bit.
Well, look, thank you so much for sharing your story and your sharing some time with us this afternoon. It's been a really good insight into the world of data within a very big firm. It's the sort of organization that we don't get to talk to as often as we would like. So thank you very much for giving us your time and coming on to the podcast today.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Tony. That was brilliant. Thank you for sharing your story.
Many thanks to Tony for joining us on the podcast. It was great to spend some time with Tony once again after all those years of setting the world to rights during our time working together. I'm so glad he's been able to continue to make a real difference at Grant Thornton.
Many thanks to Tony for joining us on the podcast. It was great to spend some time with Tony and very good to meet an old friend of Paul's as well. So, thank you again to Tony for joining us. A really refreshing take on how to approach data and AI in a big firm, and lots of lessons for anyone adopting AI and trying to further their approach with data in their organization. As always, we really do appreciate that you've listened all the way to the end of the episode. Thank you. You can support the podcast by leaving us a 5-star review wherever you listen to us. It really does help us reach more people. So if you've enjoyed what you've heard, do share us with a friend. Thank you so much for listening today, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks with a brand new episode starts at the top. We'll see you then, and bye for now.
Bye for now.